when the HOA president marched down my dock, wagging her finger and demanding I remove my illegal structure. She didn't realize she had just picked a fight with the one man who could legally shut down every single waterway in the county, and I wasn't in the mood to play nice. The lake was still that morning. The kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. A thin mist hovered just above the water, drifting lazily with a soft current, while the rising sun painted everything in shades of gold and pale pink. I sat at the very edge of my dock, legs dangling over the side, a steaming mug of coffee cradled between my hands. This was my ritual, my quiet moment before the day really began. The wooden planks beneath me had been worn smooth over the decades, and I liked to imagine I could still feel my grandfather's handiwork in them. He'd built this dock long before I was born, hammering in each nail with his own calloused hands. It had stood here for over 50 years, surviving storms, floods, and the occasional ice sheet in the harshest winters. To me, it wasn't just a dock, it was a piece of my family's history. I'd been living here full-time for the past 5 years, ever since I took on my current job as the county's Waterway Commissioner. It wasn't the kind of job most people knew much about, but it gave me a certain peace of mind. I had oversight of every legal waterway in the county, from the smallest streams to the largest lakes. My role involved issuing permits for docks and marinas, ensuring environmental regulations were followed, and, when necessary, shutting down operations that violated the law. Some folks thought it was just paperwork and inspections, but in truth, it was a position of quiet authority. I knew where every inch of legal water jurisdiction began and ended, which is why, when trouble started brewing with the local HOA, I already had a good idea how things were going to play out. It began with the sound of high heels on my dock, a sharp, rapid click against the weathered boards. The sound was so out of place here, I almost didn't recognize it. I turned to see Carol Matthews, the president of the Lakeshore Estates HOA, striding toward me like she was marching into battle. She was dressed in a fitted blazer, despite the warmth of the morning, her blonde hair pinned back so tightly it didn't dare move. In her right hand was a clipboard, thick with papers, and in her left, a rolled-up document tube that she tapped against her thigh as she walked. Her expression was set in that particular way I'd come to recognize in certain HOA leaders, the tight-lipped, self-important look of someone who'd convinced themselves they were the sheriff in town. "Good morning," I said evenly, setting my coffee on the dock beside me. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the mug before locking on mine. "Mr. Turner," she began, her voice crisp as freshly folded linen, "we have an issue to address. Your dock is in violation of HOA regulations. According to Section 14, subsection C, no private dock may extend more than 20 feet into HOA water." She rattled off the words like she'd memorized them. "Yours extends nearly 30. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching a ripple spread across the lake as a fish broke the surface in the distance. "This isn't HOA-controlled water," I said finally. She blinked at me as if I'd spoken another language. "Of course it is. The HOA manages all waterfront property within Lakeshore Estates." She pulled a paper from her clipboard and thrust it toward me. "It's right here, in black and white." I didn't take the paper. Instead, I leaned back slightly, bracing my hands on the dock. "You might manage the land up to the property lines, Carol, but the lake itself and the dock on my property are under county jurisdiction, not yours." Her lips curled into a half smile that wasn't friendly. "Mr. Turner, I think you're confused about how things work here. This is a private community. The HOA owns the lake." That word "owns" was my first clue. She had no idea what she was talking about. You can't own a public waterway, not legally. But I didn't say that yet. I wanted to see how far she'd go. "I'm giving you formal notice," she continued, pulling a bright orange slip from the document tube. "You have 7 days to remove the dock, or you'll be fined $500 per day." The orange slip fluttered in her hand like a traffic ticket in the breeze. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I studied her face, the confidence, the sense of authority she thought she had here. I'd met plenty like her in my line of work. People who'd built a small kingdom in their minds and convinced themselves they were the law. "And if I don't remove it?" I asked. Her smile widened. "Then we'll take further action. Legal action." Something about the way she said legal made me want to laugh. She didn't know who she was talking to. I'd spent years navigating state statutes, environmental codes, and property laws. I knew exactly where my authority began and ended, and I also knew hers ended a good 20 yards from where she was standing. I finally stood, brushing off my jeans. "Carol," I said, my voice calm but firm, "this dock has been here for more than 50 years. My grandfather built it before the HOA existed, and this lake, it's under county management, which means it's under my management. So unless you've been elected Waterway Commissioner without my knowledge, I'd suggest you tread carefully." Her smile faltered for just a moment, a tiny crack in the armor, but she recovered quickly, tucking the orange notice under a rock on the dock. 7 days, Mr. Turner," she said, turning on her heel. The sound of her high heels faded as she walked back toward the HOA's manicured walking path. When she was gone, I picked up the notice and read it. It was full of legal-sounding phrases, but nothing that would hold up in an actual court. Still, I knew from experience that the HOA's real power wasn't in its legal authority, it was in its ability to harass. I could expect more letters, more official visits, maybe even an attempt to cut off my access to community amenities I didn't even use. They'd try to make life annoying until I complied, but this time they'd picked the wrong target. I sat back down on the edge of the dock, the notice in my lap, and let my eyes wander across the lake. From where I sat, I could see the HOA's own docks further down the shoreline, rows of them, jutting out into the water with little aluminum boat lifts and private slips. I knew for a fact that several of them were operating without updated county permits. It wasn't a big deal most of the time. I didn't go looking for trouble unless someone forced my hand. But if Carol wanted to play the rule game, I could play it too, and my game had higher stakes. I thought about calling her bluff immediately, pulling the records that proved she was overstepping. But I decided against it. Not yet. It's always better to let someone like Carol overcommit, to dig themselves into a deeper hole. That way, when you finally pull the rug out from under them, they have nowhere to land. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but the peace felt different now, like the air was charged with the start of something. I kept replaying our conversation. In my mind, hearing her say, the HOA owns the lake, that ignorance was going to be her downfall. She didn't just come after my dock, she challenged my authority over the very waters I managed, and for someone in my position. That wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. By the afternoon, I'd already started a mental list of the steps I'd take if she pushed this any further. Step 1. Gather every record of HOA water structures in the county. Step 2. Verify permits, or rather, confirm the lack of them. Step 3. Wait for her to make her next move. She'd either try to escalate or she'd send in backup in the form of other board members. Either way, I'd be ready. That night, as the crickets started their chorus and the moon cast silver ripples over the lake, I walked back down to the dock. I stood at the edge, hands in my pockets, and looked out over the water. The lake had been here long before me, before the HOA, before Carol, and as long as I had anything to say about it, it would remain open and free to those who respected it. But if someone tried to claim it as their own, well, they were going to learn very quickly that I wasn't just another homeowner with a piece of wood sticking into the water. I was the one who controlled every inch of this lake and every waterway connected to it. And I was just getting started. The next few days after Carol's little visit were quiet in the way a brewing storm can be quiet. On the surface, nothing was happening. The lake shimmered under the summer sun. Kids splashed near the shallow edges, and fishermen cast their lines from the public pier. But beneath that calm, I knew she was planning her next move. People like Carol didn't let things go. They didn't walk away from a confrontation thinking, maybe I was wrong. They doubled down. On Tuesday morning, I got my first sign. A thick envelope sat in my mailbox, stamped with the Lakeshore Estates HOA logo, a little sailboat in a circle. Inside were 3 printed violations in bold letters. The first accused me of obstructing common water access with my dock. The second claimed I had failed to comply with community architectural guidelines, and the third, my personal favorite, charged me with non-payment of HOA improvement fees, which was laughable since I wasn't part of the HOA at all. They'd also attached a fine schedule, $500 per day starting from the date of their first notice, plus legal costs to be determined. It was ridiculous. None of it had any legal teeth, but it told me exactly what I needed to know. Carol wasn't bluffing. She was going to try and bury me in paperwork and intimidation. I sat at my kitchen table with the letter in front of me, sipping coffee and thinking through my next move. I could have ended this now. I had the documents, the maps, the county records that would shut her down in a heartbeat. But the thing about battles like this, timing was everything. If I went at her too early, she'd have time to recover and spin it to a board. No, I needed her to commit a bigger mistake first. That's when I decided to start digging. I drove into the county office later that morning, nodding to the receptionist as I headed toward the records room. "Morning, Mark," she said without looking up from her monitor. She knew I came here often, usually when someone decided to test the boundaries of county water rights. The records room smelled faintly of dust and paper, shelves lined with binders, filing cabinets stuffed with maps and permits going back decades. I pulled the Lakeshore Estates file from its slot and carried it to one of the long tables. Inside was everything I needed. Their original community development plan, the approved boundaries, the environmental assessments, and most importantly, the list of all permitted water structures. I scanned the dock permits first. The HOA had 12 community docks along the lake, plus a private marina with 18 slips. My eyes narrowed as I flipped through the paperwork. The last renewal date for most of them was more than 5 years ago. Some had expired 3 years back. Others had never been updated at all after being built. That meant, technically, they were all operating in violation of county regulations. It was exactly what I'd suspected. Carol was so busy enforcing her HOA rules that she hadn't bothered to make sure her own organization was following the law. And in my line of work, that was the equivalent of walking into a gunfight with an empty holster. I made copies of everything, the expired permits, the maps showing jurisdiction lines, even the original environmental clearance forms. I knew these would come in handy. Then I left the office and drove down to the HOA's private marina just to take a look. The place was bustling. A couple of kids were washing down a jet ski. A man in a wide-brimmed hat was loading coolers into his pontoon boat, and two women were sitting on a bench gossiping over iced coffees. I walked the dock casually, clipboard in hand, jotting down notes like I was doing a routine inspection. Most people ignored me, but I caught a few curious glances. I noticed right away that several of the boat lifts looked recently replaced and none of them had the required county inspection stickers. That alone was a finable offense. By the time I got back home, I had enough ammunition to make Carol's life miserable for months, maybe years, but I wasn't going to use it all at once. I wanted her to come to me, thinking she was holding all the cards, and then watch her face when she realized she'd been standing on a trap door the whole time. The next day, she sent reinforcements. 2 HOA board members, both men in their 50s, showed up at my front porch wearing matching polo shirts with the HOA logo. They introduced themselves as Richard and Tom, here to discuss the dock situation. Richard did most of the talking, a lot of vague legal-sounding phrases about community cohesion and uniform property aesthetics. Tom just stood there with his arms crossed, nodding like a backup singer. I let them go on for a while before I said, "You do realize this dock predates the HOA, right?" Richard cleared his throat. "That may be true, but the HOA's governing documents state, your governing documents don't override county jurisdiction," I interrupted. "And in case you're wondering, this dock is fully permitted. I signed the paperwork myself that made them blink." "Signed your own permit?" Tom asked, like he'd just caught me admitting to a crime. "I'm the county Waterway Commissioner," I said flatly. "It's literally my job." The silence that followed was delicious. Richard's jaw tightened, and Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Well," Richard said finally, "Carol will be following up." "I'm sure she will," I replied, and closed the door. That night, I sat on the dock again, watching the lights from the marina across the water. Somewhere over there, Carol was probably in her kitchen, flipping through HOA bylaws and thinking she could win this fight. She didn't know I already had the hammer poised over her head, but I wasn't ready to drop it, not yet. I wanted her to try one more stunt, something big enough that when I responded, the entire HOA would turn on her. Because if I was going to end this, I wasn't just going to protect my dock, I was going to make sure nobody in this county's HOA circles ever tried something like this with me again. Sure enough, that big move came 2 days later. Was woken early by the sound of a truck idling outside. Looking out my window, I saw a white pickup with Carter's Marine Services on the side, parked right in front of my dock. A man in work boots was unloading tools while another carried a gas-powered saw, and standing beside them, arms folded and grinning like she'd already won, was Carol. They were going to dismantle my dock. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt, stepped outside, and walked down to the water. "Morning," I said calmly. "Something I can help you with?" Carol's grin widened. "These gentlemen are here to remove your dock. You ignored multiple notices, so we're taking action. You're trespassing," I told the contractors. They hesitated, glancing at each other. "If you so much as touch one board," I continued, "you'll be violating county law, and since I'm the one who enforces those laws, I'll have to write you up personally." The older of the two men frowned. "Wait, you're the Waterway Commissioner?" "That's right," I said, holding out my wallet so they could see the badge. "And these waters aren't HOA property. You touch this dock, you'll be the ones facing fines." The contractors didn't need to be told twice. They packed up their tools and drove off, leaving Carol standing there, her expression hardening. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "Oh, Carol," I said, smiling just enough to make it sting. "It hasn't even started." As she stomped away, heels clicking angrily against the dock, I knew exactly what my next step would be. I was done letting her play offense. It was my turn now. And when I moved, I'd make sure the splash was big enough for the whole county to notice. The morning after Carol's failed dock demolition attempt, the lake seemed quieter than usual, like even the water was waiting for what would happen next. A low fog clung to the shoreline, muting the colors of the trees and making the docks across the way look ghostly. I stood on my porch with a fresh cup of coffee staring at those docks. I knew the owners of every boat and slip over there, knew who kept up their paperwork and who didn't. And now, thanks to the files I'd copied at the county office, I knew exactly how far the HOA had overstepped. It was time to stop letting Carol dictate the pace. I drove into town and parked in front of the county administration building, walking straight to my office. The receptionist gave me a curious look when she saw the stack of folders under my arm. "Big day," she asked. "You could say that," I said, managing a small grin. Inside, I spread the HOA's files across my desk like a poker player laying out a winning hand. Each expired permit was a card, each missing inspection sticker another. By the time I'd finished sorting them, I had a neat stack of violations, enough to legally suspend every water-based operation under the HOA's control. It wasn't something I did lightly. Closing a marina or dock system hurt a lot of people, most of whom weren't involved in the politics that caused the problem. But Carol had crossed a line, and if I didn't push back, she'd think she could do it again to someone else. By noon, I'd drafted the official notice. It was clear, concise, and airtight. The HOA is marina, and all 12 of its community docks were to be suspended from use pending permit renewal and environmental compliance inspections. The order would take effect immediately upon delivery. I signed it, stamped it with the county seal, and slid it into a large envelope. I could have sent it by certified mail, but I wanted to deliver it myself. There are moments in life when you don't just play the card, you lay it down so the other player can hear the thud. The HOA office was located in a tidy brick building near the community's main entrance. All neat landscaping and a flagpole out front. Inside, the air smelled faintly of potpourri and printer toner. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she wished she were anywhere else, looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, holding up the envelope. "I'm here to deliver an official county notice to your president." She swallowed, her eyes darting to the closed door behind her. "She's in a meeting." "Perfect," I said, and knocked anyway. A moment later, the door swung open and Carol appeared, flanked by 2 board members. Her smile was the kind people put on when they're caught off guard but want to look like they're in control. "Mr. Turner," she said, "to what do we owe the pleasure?" I handed her the envelope. "County business," I said simply. She opened it, scanning the first few lines before her eyes widened. The color in her face shifted from pink to a blotchy red. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice rising. "It's all in there," I replied calmly. "Your marina and community docks are operating without valid permits and haven't passed environmental inspections in years. Until those are updated, they're closed. Effective immediately." One of the board members, a tall man with silver hair, frowned. "Closed, as in, no one can use them?" "That's correct," I said. "Any use of the facilities during the suspension period will be a violation of county law, subject to fines and possible removal of the structures." Carol's lips tightened. "You're targeting us because of the dock dispute." I'm enforcing the law," I said evenly. "Something your HOA hasn't been doing for quite some time." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, the silver-haired board member cleared his throat. "We'll need to discuss this." "You do that," I said, turning to leave. "But until your paperwork is in order, those docks stay empty." When I stepped outside into the sunlight, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease just a little. The first move was done. Now all I had to do was wait for the ripple effect. It didn't take long. By that evening, my phone was buzzing with calls, not from Carol but from homeowners. Some were furious, others confused, but all of them had one question: why did the county shut down the marina? I explained the truth each time, politely but firmly. Most people understood once they realized the HOA had been neglecting its own legal obligations. A few even thanked me for finally holding them accountable. The next day, I'd heard from a friend who lived on the east side of the lake that the HOA's private Facebook group was on fire. Posts were flying back and forth, angry comments, demands for explanations, calls for Carol to resign. Someone had even uploaded a photo of the official county notice, complete with my signature and the seal. By the time I saw it, the thread had over 200 comments. Still, I knew Carol wouldn't give up that easily. People like her never admitted defeat until every option was gone. Sure enough, 2 days later, she showed up at my property again. This time without the heels. She was wearing sneakers, a windbreaker, and a look that was somewhere between desperation and forced diplomacy. "Mr. Turner," she began, trying for a lighter tone, "I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. Is that so?" I asked, not inviting her to sit. "Yes," she said, clasping her hands. "I think we can come to an understanding here. If you'll lift the suspension, we can. Forget about the dock issue." I almost laughed. "The dock issue? You mean when you tried to illegally dismantle my property?" She flinched, but pushed on. "Look, the marina is vital to this community. People are upset. If you work with us, we can." "Carol," I interrupted, "this isn't a negotiation. You don't have valid permits. Until you do, your docks and marina are closed. That's the law." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might actually yell, but instead she took a breath, plastered on a smile, and said, "Fine, we'll be in touch." After she left, I sat back on the porch and watched the lake. Across the water, the HOA's marina sat eerily still. No boats coming in or out, no kids jumping off the dock, just empty slips and quiet water. It was the kind of silence that makes people nervous, the kind that forces them to wonder how things went so wrong so fast. I knew it was only a matter of time before the board turned on her completely. And when they did, I'd be ready to end this in a way that made sure nobody in the county's HOA network ever tried to pull a stunt like this on me again. For now, though, I was content to let the silence do the work. 3 days after I served the suspension order, the HOA's grip on the lakefront was crumbling faster than I'd expected. It started with whispers from neighbors who'd never spoken to me before. A man named Bill from the South Shore stopped by my dock one morning with a thermos of coffee and a look of barely contained amusement. "You've done it," he said, pouring himself a cup before I could even offer. "Carol's own board is sharpening their knives." I raised an eyebrow. That fast? People don't like being told they can't use their boat in the middle of summer, he said. Turns out, they like it even less when they find out it's because their HOA president hasn't kept the permits up for years. I didn't say anything, but the image of Carol trying to spin her way out of this mess gave me a certain quiet satisfaction. Still, I knew a cornered opponent could be dangerous. She might try something bold and desperate. People sometimes get sloppy. That afternoon, the first public crack appeared. An HOA board member named Sharon, the same silver-haired man's wife I'd seen in their office earlier, came to see me. She carried herself with the stiff formality of someone who'd been told to be polite but was boiling underneath. "I'm here on behalf of several homeowners," she began, not bothering with small talk. "We want to know if there's any way to expedite this inspection process." "There is," I said. "Submit the permit renewals, pay the inspection fees, and pass the environmental compliance tests. Same as anyone else." She sighed clearly, hoping I'd bend. "You realize this is going to cost the HOA a fortune." "That's not my problem," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's the cost of doing business legally." She hesitated, then added, "Off the record, most of us didn't know about the expired permits. Carol kept that information. Selective." I nodded, filing that away. "If that's true, you've got bigger problems inside your board than just permits." When she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that the board was already plotting her removal. All I had to do was keep the pressure on and let gravity do the rest. By the 5th day, the HOA Facebook group was more civil war than community forum. Screenshots started circulating outside the private group threads where residents openly called for Carol's resignation. Others where she fought back and accused them of ingratitude. The tone was getting uglier by the hour. That evening, I got a call from my friend on the East Shore again. "You might want to swing by the marina," he said. "There's a crowd." When I arrived, the scene was almost surreal. A group of about 30 residents stood on the pier, waving papers and shouting at Carol, who was backed up against the marina office door. A couple of board members were there too, trying to calm people down, but it was like trying to stop a storm with an umbrella. I stayed back, watching from the parking lot. There was no reason for me to step in yet. I wasn't the cause of this scene, the HOA's neglect was. But when Carol spotted me from across the dock, her eyes narrowed like I'd just dumped gasoline on her campfire. "You," she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger. "You've turned my community against me." I didn't move closer. "No," I called back. "You did that when you stopped following the law." That only seemed to make the crowd louder. Someone yelled, "We voted you in to protect this place, not ruin it." Another voice shouted, "Resign, Carol." The chants started small, then grew, a steady drumbeat of "Resign, resign, resign." Her face hardened, but I could see the cracks. This wasn't just anger, it was the kind of public humiliation that kills political careers. The next morning, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Special meeting of the board, vote of no confidence. Date, Friday, 6 p.m. Location, HOA, Community Hall. I hadn't known better. I'd have thought it was a formal invitation to a party, and in a way it was. Friday came fast. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back corner of the community hall. The place was already filling with residents, most of them buzzing with anticipation. The board members sat at a long table up front, looking uneasy. Carol sat in the middle, hands clasped tightly on the table, her smile frozen in place. The meeting opened with formalities, roll call, reading of the agenda, but everyone was here for one reason. When the vote of no confidence finally came up, Sharon stood and laid out the case in careful, clinical language. "The failure to maintain proper permits has resulted in the closure of vital community facilities," she said. "This is the result of President Carol Whitman's actions and inactions, and has caused significant harm to our members." Carol tried to interrupt twice, but the murmurs from the crowd drowned her out. The vote wasn't even close, 5-2 in favor of removing her as president. For a moment, the room was silent. Then the applause started, tentative at first, then growing until it filled the hall. Carol didn't look at me as she gathered her papers and left, but I felt her anger trailing behind her like a shadow. After the meeting, Sharon approached me. "We'll get those permits renewed," she said. "And when we do, we'd like to work with you to make sure nothing like this happens again." I shook her hand. "That's the right way forward." Driving home that night, I felt a rare kind of calm. It wasn't just about winning, it was about restoring the balance. The lake had rules for a reason, and now the people who lived here understood them a little better. Still, I knew Carol wasn't the type to disappear quietly, and if she was planning to make a comeback, I'd have to be ready. I thought removing Carol from the HOA presidency would be the end of it. For a week, things were quiet. The board began processing the backlog of permit applications. Boaters slowly returned to the lake, and the air of tension that had gripped the community started to loosen. It felt like we were getting back to normal, but normal doesn't last long when someone like Carol is involved. It was the following Saturday when I heard the news from Bill. He showed up on my dock again, this time without coffee, his face pale. with disbelief. "She's back," he said without preamble. I set down my fishing rod. "Back doing what?" "Rallying people." "Not the board, her own little group. Word is she's promising to restore control of the lake to the homeowners. She's holding a meeting tonight at the old boathouse." The boathouse was technically on public county property, which meant it fell directly under my jurisdiction. If she was planning something there, it wasn't just politics. It was my responsibility. I got there an hour before her meeting, parking my truck in the gravel lot out back. The boathouse was a long, weather-beaten structure, its paint peeling, in white flakes, its doors hanging crooked. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift podium at the far end. I took a seat in the shadows along the wall. By the time Carol arrived, about 20 people had gathered, most of them familiar faces from the marina crowd. She strode in like she'd never lost the presidency, her voice ringing with authority. As she began, "We've been lied to," she declared, pacing in front of the group. "Our rights as homeowners have been trampled by overreach and bureaucracy. This so-called Waterway Commissioner is using outdated laws to strip us of our property and our freedom." I stayed silent, watching her work the room. She was good, I'll give her that. She knew how to tap into resentment, how to make people feel like they were the victims of some unseen enemy. But the more she spoke, the more reckless she became. She produced a stack of papers from her bag. "These," she said, waving them, "are resolutions to take control of the dock permits ourselves. We don't need the county's approval. If we stand united tonight, we take back what's ours." That was my cue. I stood, the chair legs scraping the wood floor. Every head in the room turned. "Actually," I said, walking toward the front, "you do need the county's approval. That's not just policy, that's state law. And what you're talking about here isn't unity. It's a legal seizure of public waterways." Carol's smile faltered. "You're trespassing." "No," I said evenly. "This is county property, and as commissioner, I have full authority to be here. And while we're on the subject, to have something else." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder. "This is a formal cease and desist order, effective immediately. You are prohibited from holding meetings on county property for the purpose of violating state waterway regulations." She laughed, but there was a tremor in it. "You can't stop us all." "You're right," I said, "but I can stop you, and I will." I laid the papers on the podium in front of her, then turned to address the group. "Every one of you has the right to own property, to enjoy this lake, and to make your voices heard. But you also have a responsibility to follow the same rules that keep it clean, safe, and fair for everyone. If you think those rules should change, there are legal ways to make that happen. What Carol is proposing isn't one of them, and if you follow her lead, you'll be facing fines and possibly criminal charges." The room went quiet. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One man stood, muttered something about not wanting trouble, and walked out. Others followed within 5 minutes. More than half the group had left. Carol's face was pale now, but her eyes still burned with anger. "This isn't over," she hissed as I walked past her toward the door. "It is for you," I said. "The board already voted you out. The community has moved on. The only one still fighting this battle is you." By the time I reached my truck, the meeting had broken apart completely. The boathouse door slammed shut behind me, and the sound echoed across the still water. Over the next week, the last remnants of Carol's influence faded. The new board processed the remaining permits. The marina reopened in full, and for the first time in months, the lake felt like it belonged to everyone again, not to a single person or group trying to control it. One evening, I sat at the end of my dock, the same spot where all this had started. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, the water glassy and calm. I thought about my grandfather and his words, "The lake always remembers who respects her." I realized now that it wasn't just about following rules. It was about protecting something bigger than yourself, even when it meant standing up to people who wanted to take the easy way out. Somewhere on the other side of the lake, I imagined Carol still simmering, maybe even plotting. But if she came back, I'd be ready. Because the waterways of this county weren't just lines on a map, they were living things. And I was their guardian. And as long as I held this office, no one, not an HOA president, not a self-appointed leader, not anyone was going to take that from me. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-world tales of power, community, and unexpected twists, check out my YouTube channel, Bright Reality. For videos, like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel.